First part I'm going to do about grease is simply to talk about it in theory and all this kind of stuff, and then we'll break that particular little presentation and move to talking about the various products so that we actually move into the products. But, you know, the question comes up sometimes about grease because it's a poorly understood product of why we would even have it, okay? Now, many, many centuries ago, one of the things that, believe it or not, many products are developed out of warfare. And the first record of real grease products are for chariot wheels. And that was the mobile platform of war at its time. And what they used was tallow, which is just animal fat, either beef or probably lamb more than likely, or maybe even pork, but just fat. And they stuck it in the wheel hub, and it gave enough lubrication that the two pieces of the wheel hub, which was usually a brass ring and a brass pedestal, they didn't rub themselves into oblivion. But it wasn't very good, so they had these guys that spent a lot of time that were tenders, chariot tenders, that had to go with the army with buckets of this stuff so that when they stopped and maybe were preparing to go into battle, they were ramming more grease in there, or more beef tallow really and stuff, because it didn't last long. So from the earliest days, they were having trouble with getting grease to last very long. This was their product, but it was their lubrication. Now, if you've ever seen pictures of the textile industry, the old textile industry in North Carolina and places like that, and they got the machines just to run them, right? Okay? They actually had people they called oilers. What an oiler did is he had the little can, you've seen them, where you, like this, and he had oiling points on a big machine that he walked around and he just, that's all he did. He went around the machine and kept oiling it. The reason? There's no oil distribution system in that machine with little lines out there to drip oil in those particular points. But if you didn't oil those little joints and moving parts, pretty soon your big weaving loom or whatever it was would shut down because the pieces would start breaking and falling apart because they weren't lubricated. And they knew that, so they went around with a little oil can and they squirted it on, and they had a routine to go around and squirt it on, go around. The original oilers in the Navy, guys that had this job, they had a job of oiling moving points. Remember, you see the pictures of the earlier steamships with the big pistons going up and down and they're on a shaft and that kind of stuff? Well, they had places they had to lubricate these things. So here's the point. You need a system in isolated areas that I can lubricate it without having a guy with an oil can squirting oil. Okay? I want the oil there, but I have to devise a method that it's going to be there, and I'm not going to have somebody standing with an oil can squirting oil on the moving parts. So what grease is designed to do is to lubricate places that cannot be lubricated by free-flowing oil or delivered oil or an oil bath. And so how am I going to do that? Well, a neat thing to do that they did devise in some places was they had a little thing that you had a little cup of oil, and it had a wick that came down, and it just dripped on the moving part. So this was great. All you had to do was come around and fill the oil cup up and let it drip through the wick, right? But we needed something that could replace the wick with that would be easier. So we decided we would find a way to put a blob of lubricant there that would actually ooze the oil that we wanted to be there, but the blob would stay in place, so it replaces the wick. So what grease is a thickener that contains the lubricating oil that can be put in places that it's not convenient to use liquid oil. That's what it is. Grease is used, think about the places it's used. How would you put oil up into the chassis of your vehicle? Got ball joints, I got sometimes A-frames that are doing this. I've got tie rods that go out that, you know, work the wheels back and forth, all this. So what would I do? Put a little wick thing there, and we'd all have little oil cups on the thing, and it'd be dripping oil there all the time. We'd pull into the driveway, and we'd have all this oil that kept dripping, because I'm dripping oil on all these moving parts all the time. That's not a practical thing. But I can come into this thing, and through what they call a zerk fitting, I can pump this oil and thickener in there. And remember, all the thickener's for in grease is to get close enough to the joint to bleed the lubricating oil out into what's being lubricated. And the reason I say that is the thickener of the grease does not participate in the lubrication. It only serves to act as the transporting device to get the oil into the joint. We're still lubricating with oil. That's important to understand with grease, because some people think, well, that grease won't be as good unless it's a lithium or this or that. The thickeners have to survive the environment that the grease is in order to keep close enough and to whip the oil out to lubricate whatever's moving. So if I'm in a very high temperature situation and my thickener can't handle the temperature and it melts away, I won't have any more grease there to wick the oil out to lubricate the joint. So certainly it's important, depending upon the service application of the grease, that I care about what's in the thickener. But here's the point, and here's what I was getting to. If my thickener is the best one in the world, which might be this lithium complex stuff that we use a lot of these days, if that is the best one in the world, but the lubricating oil that I put in there is junk, then the joint's going to wear out. The thickener will not lubricate the joint. It will only make sure that I'm keeping a good supple amount of grease close enough to the joint to bleed oil. If you had to make a choice, you'd have a poor thickener and an exceptional lubricant oil and put up with the poor thickener, because you'd at least be getting what oil you got there would be an excellent lubricant, and it would lubricate the joint. So the best of all worlds is to have a really good thickener for your grease and an outstanding lubricating oil that comes out of it. That's why when we talk about synthetic grease and why it's superior to petroleum, it's for the very same reason that synthetic oil is superior to petroleum, because that's what we're really talking about. The synthetic oil in the grease that gets into the joint and lubricates it, it's what's lubricating. So it's the same principles. When we talk about, well, why would synthetic grease last longer than petroleum grease? Because in the pressure that it's in, which creates heat, by the way, some hard turning pressure, doesn't vaporize the synthetic oil, because it doesn't get hot enough to do it. So it stays there liquid, stays a long time. What actually uses up petroleum grease is the oil. When it bleeds out, gets in a high pressure situation, and as that pressure is applied, the oil flashes to vapor. And it does it with a lot of turning and a lot of action, and next thing you know, you've used up the oil. And so you have to grease again to get more thickener and more oil next to the joint. So in general, let me just say this about grease. It's here to stay. Some people have actually assumed that grease would go away. No, but better grease has created situations of where we have vehicles that have joints, tie rods and so forth, and they have no grease fittings because they're filling those grease pockets with high performance synthetic grease from the factory, and they're basically saying that under most normal circumstances, this stuff should never wear out. Well, I'm here to tell you that's really a foolish thing to say, because over time in the elements, probably the thickener itself may become very hard, and then the grease in many cases will kind of recede from the moving part, and it's no longer touching it to wick the oil out. So I don't really believe that, and I think it's a mistake that they make, and I think it's why we find that a lot of newer cars at about 10 years, you're replacing ball joints and tie rods and stuff. It's because we can't grease them anymore. Now, your truck and my truck still have grease points because they consider heavy duty vehicles will be harder on those joints and they still need grease. And let me tell you, I mean, you know, a car that's running over all these roads and doing this stuff and bouncing around and being turning. And the other one is, CV joint. What a mistake made that you can't lubricate a CV joint. It's just made to wear out. What a dumb idea.
No.
All right, listen.
It's made to wear out.
Oh, okay. So the point is that if we had any way just to get some grease inside that CV joint that would lubricate that thing, because they put grease in there to begin with, but then you can't get back to it, it's behind the boot. And so after a period of time, it finally dries out. And now it's just a short period of time before it wears out. They don't even give us a chance to lubricate the thing. So I just want to emphasize to you that there's a lot of applications for grease, but there's different types of grease. And that's what we're going to talk about in the next segment that I'll do in just a minute, is about compatibilities of grease and what that's all about. But this little segment was just on the theory of grease. Remember, grease goes in places that you want to get oil to, that you cannot lubricate it because there's no way to stand there and squirt oil on it. So you put the grease in there, the grease adheres to it, the grease bleeds out the oil, and lubricates the joint. So when you get into greases, there's lots of fancy ways that they're put together, but that's what we're doing. We're simply trying to keep this stuff in place long enough that it can lubricate the thing for the work that it has to do, and there's no other way to get oil there, you know, trying to squirt it with a squirt can, which is not very practical at 50 or 60 miles an hour running down the road. Probably doesn't work.